Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts line setter Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's Ultimate Fighter 19 finale event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will only be able to contribute in the main event of the evening. Now, all picks are subject to change following the weigh-in, so stick around and check out our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks article, which will usually go up the day before the event. Now, briefly looking back at the last week's event, our premium package for UFC Fight Night 43 and UFC Fight Night 44 went 2-3 to lose 1.1 units overall. We won bets on Jake Matthews and Jared Rosholt, but we failed to cash on James Muntasri, Mike Rhodes, and Antonio Braga Neto in a very controversial decision. Now, we also did have a free bet for that event. We won a 2-unit parlay on the over between Ricardo Lamas and Hakran Diaz, as well as Ray Borg. Now, back to the present. The Ultimate Fighter 19 finale features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on Fox Sports 1 this Sunday. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary portion of the card is a light heavyweight matchup between Robert Drysdale, who is 6-0 overall, taking on Keith Bearish, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, a little disclaimer here. The lines are fairly fresh still, only been out for a few hours, so there hasn't been a ton of movement, so you could see some changes out there. All odds are going to be from 5dimes.eu, just for everybody to know out there. And Drysdale, I opened minus 855. The comeback on Bearish is plus 485, and the line actually stayed steady. Looks like a lot of people don't really care to bet that line early on, at least. And, you know, it's really Drysdale's fight to win or lose. I mean, Drysdale is a phenomenal BJJ whiz, of course, we all know. Those of you guys that follow grappling, follow the sport MMA, I mean, there's been a ton of hype around Drysdale for a long time. He's an Abu Dhabi champion. I mean, you're talking about world-class jiu-jitsu. There's not much better. You can't get much better than Drysdale. So there's a lot of excitement and buzz behind Drysdale, making his UFC debut, no doubt about that. He's fighting a very solid opponent in Bearish, though. I mean, Bearish is the Ring of Combat middleweight champion, but that's one key word right there. He's the middleweight champion of Ring of Combat, and, you know, he's moving up to fight Drysdale at 205. But Bearish is also, he's got some grappling credentials to go along with it as well. I mean, not like Drysdale, but he is a former high school wrestler. He's got some solid jiu-jitsu, and his fight style, actually, a lot of times, I mean, he's got some solid stand-up game to go along with it, but he tends to like to take the fight to the floor, use some ground and pound, try to get the submission, positional control, that sort of thing. So more times than not, I mean, the ground game is his area, and he's fighting one of the best grapplers in the world. So thus the steep line, minus 855 for Drysdale. I mean, unfortunately for Bearish, I think what's going to happen here is Drysdale's going to get him to the floor early, and once it's on the floor, I don't expect him to last too long. I mean, that's the level of high-class jiu-jitsu, really, top-notch jiu-jitsu that you're going to see from Drysdale. So he should finish this fight fairly quick. But unfortunately for Bearish, because he is pretty solid, I think he's got some potential, and he could win some fights definitely at 185, possibly in the UFC, or against other lower-level competition at 205 as well. But that's basically it. You're fighting a more well-rounded fighter in Bearish against a pure grappler in Drysdale that's evolving his overall MMA game. He trains with a lot of decent people as well, Drysdale does, but still, he's going to have a huge advantage, and that's all he's going to need. So it's hard to pick against Drysdale.
And I'm on that side as well. I just really think Drysdale's going to be so much bigger and better on the ground. What this fight's going to really come down to for me is the size. Bearish is just undersized. He's coming in here, moving up a weight class to take on one of the best ground fighters in the world, not just in the UFC and the UFC light heavyweight division, on the planet. Robert Drysdale is fantastic. I mean, he's been teaching and training jiu-jitsu in Las Vegas for years before he actually made the transition to MMA. This guy is extremely high level, and he's already doing extremely well. He's won all of his fights so far in his 6 professional MMA bouts via first-round submission, and it has been different submissions. So he's not a one-trick pony in terms of what he's pulling off on the ground. This guy, when he gets on top of you, when he gets on the ground, the fight's over. That's just the way it is. Now, Bearish is a decent grappler. I mean, he is a brown belt, I believe, but Robert Drysdale, there is nothing that Bearish can throw at Drysdale that is going to surprise him. On the feet, I think Bearish actually is going to be a bit of a better striker. He has some decent kickboxing, some decent Muay Thai, and he has some power, but I just really feel that Drysdale is going to be pressing him against the fence, looking for a takedown, and the size and strength advantage is just going to be a bit too much. So I'm going on Robert Drysdale's side, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to be able to pull this one off. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have a women's bout between Ultimate Fighter Season 18 competitor Sarah Morris, who is 3-1 overall, taking on UFC newcomer Alexis Dufresne, who is 5-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Dufresne opens minus 190, the comeback on Morris plus 150. This should be an excellent matchup. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Morris. She was a tough 18 veteran. She actually beat La Rosa on the show, beat Morgan on the show, lost to Pena by submission in the semis. So she actually performed very respectful on the show. I mean, you got to give her credit for that. She's a very talented fighter. She's more of a grappling-based fighter, has solid wrestling, good BJJ. She can win by submission from top or bottom, but that's what she needs to do. On the feet, she really doesn't have that much to offer. She's a little slow, a little predictable. On the other hand, Dufresne, what we do know about her, she's a BJJ world champion. She was scheduled to face Nunes earlier this year, but she had a rib injury and was forced to pull out of that fight. So there's a lot of hype surrounding Dufresne. We were just talking about all the hype on Drysdale. Well, Dufresne is a similar type of fighter. She's still raw on the feet, but she is a very powerful young lady, improving her skill set training with Hendo and crew in California. And again, with all that grappling ability and the buzz surrounding her, with her physical attributes, she's pretty strong for the weight class. I think there's some good things in line for Dufresne down the road as well, if she can get this first victory making her debut. Now also, we have to say this, there's not a ton of footage out there on Dufresne, so a lot of us are going to be looking at this fight blindly. I mean, the quick fight that she had against Couture, that's about it. You could dig as deep as you want. You could kind of get a basic idea of how good Dufresne is, and it seems like all the hype and everything that you can gather is legit. And again, with her physical advantages, and everybody just having that much respect for her, I expect a good performance here, and I think Morris actually matches up relatively well for Dufresne. So I'm expecting Dufresne to be a little bit better on the feet. I think if it does hit the ground, I think Dufresne can be a little bit better on the ground as well. And now again, both these girls are very talented and can win by submission, but I think you got to give the edge in all areas to Dufresne here in this spot. But much respect to Morris. I expect this to be, again, kind of a competitive decision, but or competitive fight, I should say. If we could see a submission, of course, but you have to give the edge to Dufresne here.
Now, I'm in agreement. I really think that Alexis Dufresne has a very bright future. Just like Nick, there isn't a ton of footage out there, but from what I've seen, she looks fantastic. She's strong, she hits hard, and she has a very solid submission game. So one thing that I really like about her is when she gets on top of you, she doesn't just drop down the pitter-patter ground and pound like some of the girls in the 135-pound division do. I mean, she throws with really bad intention. She's trying to do damage. She's not in there just trying to win a round. She wants to finish fights, and she's done that so far. I believe every single one of her fights has been finished so far. She's ferocious. Now, Morris, on the other hand, she's a very good grappler. She has pretty solid wrestling and a pretty competent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. I mean, she pulled off a triangle choke on Tara La Rosa, of all people. So, I mean, that is impressive in its own right. But I think what's going to happen here is she's just going to be outclassed. Dufresne is extremely athletic. She's very powerful. And she has the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background to go with it. She actually started in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before transitioning to MMA. And she's still very young and new to the sport. So it's crazy to see how talented and how much people are raving about this girl after she's been only fighting for about 2 or 3 years. I do think that, if Dufresne gets a little too reckless, then she could get herself caught in something. But other than that, I really see Dufresne lighting her up on the feet, dropping huge punishment on the ground, and potentially even getting a submission just from pure physical strength and wearing Morris down. Now, we also have not seen Dufresne really fight the distance, so if this fight does go a little long, that could affect things. But overall, man, I'm really feeling that that this fight's going to be going Alexis Dufresne's way. She's just got a ton of talent, and I completely believe in her. Now moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have a pair of Ultimate Fighter 19 contestants in Dan Spohn, who is 8-3 overall, taking on Patrick Walsh, who is 4-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Spohn opens minus 230, the comeback on Walsh plus 170, and a little bit more action on Walsh coming in. The line has dropped some. It's minus 195 right now for Spohn, and the comeback on Walsh is plus 155. So basically 2-1 or so. This should be a pretty competitive fight. I think Spohn is the overall better fighter. I mean, Walsh is a little bit more one-dimensional. Walsh is more of a grinder, grappler, wrestler type of stylist. He's got a little bit of power on the feet. Tends to swing a little bit wild though, not much technique, but he is improving his overall game. I mean, he's still fairly young. He's 25 years old. And you can see the potential in him, no doubt about it. And the guy's tough as nails, man. He's got a lot of heart. I mean, look at his, fights on The Ultimate Fighter, especially his semifinal loss to Anderson. I mean, he performed pretty well. I mean, as well as he could. He got outclassed there by Anderson, and he hung in there and made it at least close and competitive and interesting. So got a lot of respect for Walsh. But again, I think he's fighting a similar type of fight as he did in the semifinals, and to Spohn. I mean, Spohn might not have the wrestling credentials that Anderson did, but Spohn is also a very well-rounded fighter. He likes to take the fight to the ground. He's been more known for The Ultimate Fighter this season, for his striking, but really he's a pretty well-rounded guy, more of a grappling-based fighter himself. He does prefer to take the fight to the ground. Spahn's background, he's a former NAAFS champion. He's a Bellator veteran, so he's fought in better competition, overall all throughout his career. And he's worked really hard to improve his overall skill set. So you gotta respect that from Spohn as well. Right now I think he's kind of reaching the peak of his career, and he can be competitive with a lot of guys at the light heavyweight division. On the feet from Spohn, he fights in a southpaw stance. He's very effective with his kickboxing, has a little bit of power on his hands, and again, he does look for the takedowns. So he's got a pretty decent fight IQ. He had a war with Van Buren there, in the semifinal fight that unfortunately didn't go his way. But he's gonna, I think, have another war here with Walsh. I think it's gonna be a little bit different because again, Walsh is more of a wrestling-based fighter. He is aggressive. He starts to gas. He gets even more sloppy though, Walsh does. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a finish in this fight, but at the same time, I think both these guys are tough enough to withstand each other a little bit, and I'm sure it probably will hit the scorecard. So I'm going to lean towards Spohn because I do think he's a more versed fighter. I think he's still a level ahead as far as skill set goes. But Walsh's game, he's got a ton of heart. He's going to come to fight, so I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps it close. But you got to lean with Spohn, I think, in this spot.
I'm in relative agreement here. I just really think that Daniel Spohn is going to have a pretty huge striking advantage. I've personally witnessed this guy knock someone out in less than 10 seconds in his Bellator debut in Ohio, so Dan Spohn is not to be messed with on the feet. The guy definitely has some big power, and he can finish you with elbows, punches, knees, whatever. The guy's vicious on the feet. He's also going to have a pretty big size and reach advantage. He's got about 5 inches on Walsh in terms of height and about the same in reach. So if this fight stays standing, I think Walsh is going to be in huge trouble. Now, of course, Walsh is probably going to want to keep this fight on the ground in the clinch where he's at his strength. He likes to be in top position. He has some pretty good submission skills, as we've witnessed in his fight to get in the house. Walsh, the problem with him, of course, is conditioning. If he starts to slow down, that's going to leave an opening for Spohn to potentially knock him out. So I would not put it past Spohn getting a late knockout in this fight, on top of just getting an incredibly quick knockout as well. The guy is extremely, extremely dangerous. Now, Spohn has been controlled in the past, and he has lost some tough decisions. So Walsh is a live dog here, but my money's probably going to be on Daniel Spohn. I think the guy has a bright future. He's got some serious talent, and I can definitely see him outworking Walsh on the feet, and especially as this fight wears on, I think it's going to be a lot tougher to take Spohn down, And I think that Walsh is going to get in some big trouble with the conditioning. So unless Walsh gets a quick finish, which I just really don't see happening, then I think this fight is Daniel Spohn's to lose. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Adriano Martins, who is 25-7 overall, taking on Juan Manuel Puig Carrion, making his UFC debut with an 11-2 record. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Martins minus 400, Puig plus 280. That was my opening line. Another line that's holding steady. Martins is still minus 400. Puig is still plus 280. I guess starting off with Puig, he's a very strong, physically strong young prospect fighting out of Mexico. More of a wrestling-based fighter. On the feet, he pushes forward, throwing with power, but he's kind of predictable. One of those guys that's a little bit slow. You can see what's coming. You could probably defend okay with him too, because he's not really that good of a striker. Again, he's another one of these guys that prefers the takedown game and prefers to close the distance, get the fight to the floor, work some ground and pound, try to work a submission game, which isn't that bad. So that's the style of fighter you're getting with Puig. He's only 25 years old, so he's young. He's constantly improving his overall game, but he's still not quite there yet. And this is a very tough UFC debut for him. I mean, Martins is really solid. I mean, Martins is coming off that brutal KO loss to Cerrone, but man, before that, really, you could tell he was definitely on the rise in his overall career. I mean, Martins just sat there and just blew out Cruikshank. And then, of course, in Strikeforce, he had that solid, dominating victory over Gurgel as well. And he's one of these guys that you could really tell is putting the work in, elevating his overall game. On the feet, the guy's nasty. Martins has nasty power. I mean, he's a southpaw. He stalks you, walks forward, tries to throw hard kicks, hard punches. He's got tremendous knockout power. If he gets on top of you on the ground, nasty ground and pound, a good submission game as well, a good takedown defense. So man, this is just such a hard fight for Puig to come in and make his debut. So it's really a no-brainer for me. I mean, unless Puig can catch him on the feet, Martins does tend to leave his hands down a little bit, has a little bit of suspect defense, but you know what? Puig is not Cerrone. He's not one of these guys that's going to land that kick or land that effective blow to knock Martins out. I don't think, at least. So unless he does something like that, I don't expect Puig to come away with a victory here. I think Martins is just too far ahead of him at this point. I think Martins probably ends up finishing Puig. If not, he's going to outpoint him to a clear-cut decision victory here. So I think it's fairly obvious. Martins should roll on and get back on track here and bounce back from his Cerrone loss with an impressive win over Puig.
And I completely agree this time around. I just really feel like this is an unfair matchup for someone to be making their UFC debut, and Adriano Martins was a guy that UFC was potentially considering being one of the top level guys. I mean, they matched him up with Cerrone in his last fight. You know, he's going from facing a top 10 fighter to a UFC debut, and I think this is more of a build-up fight, even though they're trying to build up in Mexico and get some Mexican fighters so that they can build a presence there. I think that this is getting Juan Manuel Puig more thrown to the wolves than anything. I really feel for the guy a little bit. I just think Puig's style isn't really going to work here. The guy is a pretty talented fighter, and he's got an unorthodox style that's not like most Mexican fighters, where he's actually more based on wrestling and top control and ground and pound. Almost all the Mexican fighters really love to stand and bang and just have wars. And that's really not the way that Puig fights. He's more of a grinder. And I think that fits right into what Adriano Martins wants to do. Martins actually has some serious talent on the feet. I mean, he has some power. I mean, he landed a huge shot on Darren Cruikshank, who is a very talented striker in his own right and is on the rise in the lightweight division. And he actually has some extremely solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu credentials and submission skills once the fight hits the canvas. So I think wherever this fight goes, Puig's in trouble. If Puig wants to keep it on the feet, Martins completely outclasses him unless Puig lands like a Hail Mary bomb, which is possible. Martins does not have a tremendous chin. He got knocked out in his last fight, so it could happen. But I really don't see that happening. And even if Puig gets the takedown against Martins, I think he's going to be in big trouble there as well. Martins is an extremely talented grappler, and he can either sweep him, he could force a transition, he could stand back up if he wants to, or he could probably pull off the submission. I really don't think that Puig's submission defense is at the same level as Martins' submission offense. So wherever this fight goes, I think Martins is going to be in control, and he's probably going to be able to get the finish at some point. So again, nightmare matchup for Puig to make in his debut, and I think Martins gets back on track here. Now this takes us to a bantamweight contest between a pair of 0-1 UFC fighters, between Juma Beke Torsion, who is 17-1 overall, taking on Leandro Issa, who is 11-4. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public ship at things so far?
Torsion opens minus 130, the comeback on Issa minus 110. This is an interesting fight. I mean, two guys that I think badly need a win coming off of disappointing debut losses. Starting off with Torsion first, we got to give him a little bit of credit because he was fighting out of his weight class. He made his debut at 145. He should be at 135. So this is definitely a better natural fit coming back down to his weight. But that being said, I mean, there's a lot of question marks surrounding Torsion. I mean, he's another one of these guys that had a lot of hype coming into the UFC before his debut. But if you really look at some of those fights that he was in, I mean, he wasn't that impressive. He does have a well-rounded skill set. He's got some power on the feet. He's got some solid wrestling, solid jiu-jitsu to go along with it. He just doesn't put everything together well enough, I think. And his cardio is a little bit questionable as well. Now, you can say a lot of the similar things to Issa. I mean, looking over, Issa's an extremely talented fighter. He trains with a great camp and Evolve. He's got a very solid grappling base. That's what he does best. But again, he's kind of one of these letdown guys. I mean, in his debut to Doan, he started off the fight okay, did what he had to do with getting takedowns and grappling, controlled some of that aspect, which was expected, but then started fading his own right, got caught by some punches, and actually ended up getting submitted, which was a little bit of a surprise. Doan has a pretty good jiu-jitsu game, but still, I mean, that's Issa's specialty, so getting submitted like that is definitely disappointed. I'm expecting him to bounce back and, again, perform a little bit better than he did. I'm expecting Torsion to bounce back and perform better than he did as well. Both these guys need to keep their job. They don't want to go 0-2 and probably get cut from the UFC roster. But Issa should have some advantages in this fight. He's going to have a little bit of reach over Torsion. I think, has the better grappling base again. He's got decent wrestling, good positional control, better jiu-jitsu game overall. But Torsion is going to have a little bit of the stand-up edge, and if he can maintain the fight on the feet, I think he could do a little bit more damage, even though he doesn't stay busy enough for me to like him that much, honestly. I think Issa ultimately is going to control a little bit more of the fight, though. I think he's going to get the takedowns. I think he's going to be able to maybe catch Torsion's back, make things interesting, and probably grind out a decision win. I mean, Issa is definitely talented enough that he can win some fights at 135. Torsion, on the other hand, depends on who he's matched up with. I don't see him getting as many W's in the UFC. So I think it is Issa's fight to win or lose. If he doesn't quit, he doesn't give up, which is a question mark because it is, again, disappointing. Some of his performances in the past have been. But I think he's got the talent to pull off this win. I mean, Torsion should be a pretty good matchup for Issa if he uses grappling base, gets the takedowns, and controls it that way. So slight lean towards the dog in Issa.
And I'm in complete agreement here. I'm actually really surprised that the public is falling for the Torsion hype train again, that he's actually getting bet up a little bit. Did they not see the first fight against Market Diva in his UFC debut? I mean, he looked terrible. And granted, he was undersized, but, I mean, he showed very little promise in that fight. There was really nothing redeeming about that. And I think that he's facing someone that actually uses their grappling even better than a Diva did in Issa. So I can really see a complete repeat of that fight, except Issa's actually better in terms of submissions, positional control. I think Issa could definitely do some damage if he gets on top of Torsion. Now, of course, the one thing you got to worry about is Issa's conditioning. Issa is getting a little bit older and does not have the greatest chin. And as we saw in his UFC debut, he ran out of steam after that first round where he was actually doing really well against Russell Doan in terms of getting top position and getting some good spots on the canvas. Once he wasn't able to get the takedown, he definitely lost steam. And then, of course, Doan was able to get a submission after Issa ran out of gas. Now, I am a little worried that could happen again, but hopefully that was UFC jitters and not Issa's actual cardio, because we really haven't seen Issa have that bad a conditioning before. So I'm hoping that he was just a little too nervous and excited for his UFC debut. Now, Torsion, he really doesn't offer that much. He's not the most active on the feet. He does have a little bit of pop in his punches, but he really doesn't throw anything that's going to be super dangerous. And in terms of grappling, he's okay when he's in top position, but I really don't see him getting in top against Issa unless Issa gives up on a takedown and pulls guard. And I'm hoping he doesn't do that, and hopefully Issa's smart enough to not do that. I mean, he does train out of a great gym, as Nick mentioned, at Evolve, and Issa is definitely the more accomplished fighter. He's fought in better organizations. He's fought against better competition. And I think he's just the better overall fighter. I think Issa is definitely the right side to be on, so I'm going to pick Leandro Issa to get his first UFC victory here. Now this takes us to the last bout on the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card, and it's a lightweight contest between Jesse Ronson, who is 13-4 overall, taking on Kevin Lee, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Lee opens minus 215, the comeback on Ronson plus 165, and line is holding steady, so not a lot of movement, not a lot of action coming in on this fight. Kind of a tricky fight, a competitive fight, because you have your typical grappler versus striker matchup. Lee's going to be your grappler, Ronson's going to be your striker. Now, granted, Lee's a little bit more well-rounded than your typical grappling-based fighter. His hands aren't that bad. He's got a little bit of power on the feet as well. His defense needs to be improved a little bit. He got tagged quite a bit by Quinta in that fight. But that being said, I mean, making your debut against Ally Quinta and having the success he did is not too bad either. So he was pretty impressive, and you could definitely got to see the potential in Lee in that fight. Now, and Ronson, he's got another tough test ahead of him though, because Ronson is one of these guys. He's been thrown right in there with the Wolves against very solid competition in the UFC. And he's performed okay. I mean, a little bit disappointing in his last fight, of course. I was expecting him to do a little bit better, but it is what it is. I mean, Ronson got beat. He deserved to lose that fight overall, but his performance and how he matches up with Lee is going to be interesting here, because Ronson's takedown defense is pretty solid, and he should have the pure striking edge over Lee on the feet. I mean, Ronson does mix things up well. He's got good kickboxing, good power on the feet. His ability to sprawl and brawl only improves and gets a little bit better, but the big edge that Lee does have over him, I mean, even if Lee struggles to get the takedowns at first, I think potentially Lee can get Ronson down, and his grappling game, his pure submission game is very impressive. I think he could definitely give Ronson trouble. Even though Ronson's improved his defense, submission defense overall, it looks like it. He keeps continuing to get better at it. I think Lee's a little bit on another level, man. He's only 21 years old as well, so there's a big upside to Lee. Not that Ronson's old, he's only 28 years old, I realize that too, but still, Ronson's kind of had a longer, harder career at this point, and I think Lee's a little bit of the fresher fighter. Again, a bigger upside, the better all-around skill set, and I'm expecting him to just utilize this pure MMA game in all areas and kind of control the fight, whether he pushes Ronson up against a cage, mixes in some takedowns from time to time, even offensively can land on Ronson on the feet. Ronson's striking is pretty solid, but he can get hit, definitely. His defense, again, is lacking a little bit. So this is going to be an interesting fight. I think it's going to go back and forth. I think both these guys are going to perform respectfully for the fans out there. I think it's going to be a fun fight. I think both these guys wanted to get their W here. If Ronson loses this fight, he could very well be cut by the UFC. So I think there's a little bit more pressure on Ronson. And if Lee doesn't perform well, he could very well be cut. I'm expecting Lee, win or lose, to probably get at least one more shot. But I think Lee's going to actually win this fight.
Is that an echo? Because I agree with you again, Nick. For this one, I got to go with Kevin Lee. Looking at the fight, I just think that he's the much more well-rounded fighter. Now, Jesse Ronson is a pretty decent striker on the feet, but when he's concerned about the takedown, when he's concerned about what his opponent's doing, he gets a little hesitant. He doesn't really throw with confidence. He doesn't really fire off his shots with conviction. And I think that's something that Kevin Lee can take advantage of. Lee's obviously not a slouch on the feet himself. He has some good power. He's developing. He's very young and extremely talented. And I just think that in terms of well-roundedness, he's got a clear edge on Jesse Ronson. Now, if this fight goes to the canvas, Lee should be able to win the transition game. Lee should be able to get on top, and Lee definitely has the submission advantage. Now, Ronson has shown some pretty decent defensive grappling ability when he is on his back, which has happened quite a few times now. Ronson has been able to at least avoid getting tapped out, and he was put on his back by some pretty tough guys like Prazeres in his UFC debut. So I think that it's unlikely that Lee will be able to get a finish unless he really lands some hefty ground and pound or hurts Ronson standing to set up a submission. So what I really see happening in this fight is Ronson being a little patient to a fault on the feet, more concerned about the takedown, and then Lee taking advantage of it with some aggression on the feet. I think he can push the pace, push this fight into the clinch if he wants. I think he can shoot in for some takedowns, force Ronson to fight defensively. And I really see Lee being able to pretty much win it in all areas unless Ronson is really able to take it to that next level, find some confidence in his strikes, and go for it. Because Ronson does have some pretty solid striking ability. His defense isn't quite there, but he can throw some pretty nasty stuff. It just depends on whether he believes in himself, and I'm not quite sure he's gonna. So my pick is definitely going to be Kevin Lee. I think that he has a lot more potential, and he's a pretty promising young fighter. Now this brings us to the first fight on the main card. We have a flyweight contest between undefeated Justin Scoggins, who is 9-0 overall, taking on Dustin Ortiz, who is 13-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Scoggins opens minus 350. The comeback on Ortiz is plus 250. And Ortiz has performed relatively well in his last few fights, especially. I mean, he had that controversial loss to Moraga. He had that great fight with Borg that he probably shouldn't have won on the judges' scorecards, but still he hung in there with Borg and made it a heck of a fight. And he's a plus 250 underdog. That tells you the kind of skill set and the kind of special fighter really I think Scoggins is. I mean, most of us do. A lot of backers out there really believe that Scoggins is a potential contender. I mean, he's only 22 years old. He's phenomenal on the feet. I mean, he's got that striking background, that karate, kickboxing background that's really special. I mean, his movement, his accuracy, his power, everything about his striking game is to love, really. I mean, he's a southpaw. You got to throw that in the mix as well. But not just that. I mean, he's really surprised, I think, the MMA community in general by his grappling ability. He's obviously training at a good camp with the American Top Team. His wrestling is very solid. He's able to get takedowns, able to control, showing some scrambles and submission ability as well. So he's a very well-rounded prospect. I mean, at age 22, he's only going to continue to improve his game. Now, he's facing by far the best and toughest challenge in his career in Ortiz, because Ortiz is another one of these guys. He trains at a good camp as well with Rufus Sport. He has pretty outstanding wrestling, grappling game, good scrambles, and his stand-up's not too bad either. So Ortiz is a very well-rounded prospect in his own right. He's still relatively young. He's 25 years old. And again, he's kind of been climbing that ladder to 125, getting himself into title contention. So I think the winner of this fight takes a huge leap forward and is going to be thrown in the mix and maybe a fight or two away from getting that potential title shot. But I think that winner is going to be Scoggins. Again, I have a lot of respect for Ortiz. He's a very solid fighter, but I think the way Scoggins has been performing, he's just going to outclass Ortiz. I think if it stays upright, which I assume the Scoggins is probably going to want to keep it upright in this spot, I think Scoggins is going to land the better and more efficient strikes. He's going to be the more dangerous fighter. I really think that it's Scoggins' fight to win or lose, and Scoggins is probably going to get the W here. I mean, he's definitely a special talent, and I look forward to watching him fight for the flyweight title one day.
Now, this is going to be a situation where I actually completely agree with the public hype. Justin Scoggins is a special young fighter, trains out of a great gym and American Top Team, and they've really harnessed his talent and helped him evolve. He's actually added some nice wrestling to his game, something he didn't quite have before. So he's actually getting a lot better, and he's still so young at just 22 years old. Now, Ortiz, you can't discount him either. The guy is rock solid. He trains out of a great gym as well with Duke Rufus. And in his last couple fights, he's proven that he can hang with some really top talent with his decision loss against John Moraga, a fight I thought he won, and an extremely close decision against rising up-and-comer Ray Borg, where he walked away with a close decision. So this is a huge test for Justin Scoggins. It's going to set the barometer on where he is right now in the flyweight division. Scoggins definitely has the striking edge. He's got that karate background. He's extremely dangerous with his kicks. He can throw kicks from any angle at any time. Head, body, legs, you name it, and it's going to come with power. It can be spinning attacks, whatever. This kid is extremely diverse on the feet. Now, on the ground, I think Ortiz is going to have a slight edge in terms of wrestling. That's pretty much his bread and butter. That's how he was able to make those last few fights competitive. And it's going to be coming down to whether or not Scoggins is able to really unload on the feet with confidence. Because if he does throw a lot of those kicks, he's going to leave himself open to some takedowns from Dustin Ortiz. So will Scoggins be able to fend off those takedown attempts if he leaves that opening? That's what this fight is going to completely boil down to, because I really feel that if Ortiz wants to try to stand and bang with Scoggins, it's going to end very poorly. If Ortiz is able to get top position and keep Scoggins on his back, he could pull off the upset, but I really don't see it. I think Scoggins is going to be too dynamic, too talented, and if he does get put on his back, he should be able to get back to his feet and then get right back to punishing Ortiz in the stand-up portion. So my pick is going to be Justin Scoggins. Now moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Derek Lewis, who is 10-2 with 1 no contest, taking on UFC newcomer Guto Inacente, who is 6-2 overall. Now Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Lewis opens -260, Inacente +180. We have seen some action coming on this fight, and it was all been on Inacente, actually. The lines dropped. Lewis is now -210. The comeback on Inacente +160. Gotta say, I have respect for the dog. I can understand why some early action's coming in that way, because he's definitely a very skilled fighter. But the problem with me is I think he should be fighting at 205, and he's, making his heavyweight UFC debut, which has been rumored for a while. He does train with good camp and Black Zillions, but again, Inacente, he's a very solid, well-rounded fighter, but more well-known for a striker than anything else. But he does have a solid jiu-jitsu game as well. Was on the Strikeforce roster. UFC brought him over. But again, he was fighting at 205, so he's making his UFC debut at heavyweight, so that's interesting. He's been battling some injuries the last couple of years, which is a little bit scary. He's had a lot of time off. I believe it was, a knee injury that, actually happened with training with Alistair Overeem and crew over at the Black Zillion camp. So Inacente at least is getting some solid training at a good camp. And again, he's going to continue to round off his skill set a little bit and add to his striking game. Again, he's got okay submissions, but I think he's going to be undersized against Lewis. I mean, Lewis is a strong, aggressive fighter. I mean, the guy's tough as nails for heavyweight, for having that size at 6'3", like almost 260 pounds. The guy's got pretty good cardio. The guy moves fairly well for having all that strength as well. He's tough as nails, like I said. I mean, you could club this guy, and it doesn't have any effect on him. It seems like you could put him on his back. The guy somehow manages to get himself in a better position, and then dropping some nasty ground and pound on the feet. Inacente is going to have a huge advantage as far as pure technical skill, speed, ability to land punishment, of course, but Lewis is one of these brawlers. I mean, you don't want to get in a brawl. I mean, Inacente has to remain technical because, Lewis, with all the power that he punches, it could be a very dangerous matchup for Inacente, especially if he belongs to 205. So I think what we're going to probably see in this fight is Lewis closing the gap a little bit, pushing Inacente up against a cage, looking for a takedown, because Lewis actually has a pretty good, solid wrestling base in his own right. He's going to look to get the fight to the floor and do what he does best and land some brutal ground and pound. So Inacente, I don't think he's going to have much to offer off his back, even though he does have that jiu-jitsu background. I think Lewis is going to be able to control most of this fight. And again, he's the type of guy that seems to go strong even for 3 rounds. And I think Inacente is going to have the cardio issues out of the 2. So this is actually Lewis's fight to win or lose. But again, the more pure skilled fighter might be Inacente. But I think the heart, the toughness, the strength of Lewis is going to kind of carry him through in this fight. So I am picking Lewis. I think he has some potential, and he's going to continue to improve his game as well. So Lewis is my side.
And I'm in complete agreement on this one. I really feel like size is going to be by far the biggest factor in this fight. Derek Lewis, come fight time, is probably going to have about 40 pounds on Guto Inacente, and that's going to make the difference in my opinion. Inacente is a pretty solid striker. He's very dangerous. He's diverse. He throws a lot of spinning attacks. He can mix it up. He can throw pretty much the kitchen sink, as we saw in his last Strikeforce fight, but that was so long ago. He's been out with injuries for quite a while. He was supposed to fight Shane Del Rosario in his UFC debut for UFC 168, and of course that fight got scratched. Man, it just feels like it's been forever since Guto Inacente actually fought inside a cage. And in the meantime, Derek Lewis had a very promising UFC debut where he obliterated Jack May, who was a kickboxer, a guy that was primarily a striker, kind of like Inacente. And I feel like this fight could go along that same path. Now, if Inacente can get open space and really start to unload with strikes, he might be in a good spot here. So it's all going to come down to speed and footwork for him, because if Lewis gets his hands on him, if Lewis can press him into the fence, if Lewis can take him down, if Lewis can get on top, I think Inacente is in a world of hurt. Lewis has solid top control. Lewis has some heavy ground and pound. He might even be able to pull off a submission just from pure strength and size alone. So That's 100% what this fight is going to come down to. Will Inacente be able to keep his distance? Will he be able to land those strikes? Will he be able to use that speed? And will his conditioning hold up? He clearly slows down in some of his fights, and he doesn't have the most devastating power despite being able to throw all kinds of really fancy and diverse attacks. Even when they connect rock solid, they don't always knock out their opponent. I mean, as you saw in his last Strikeforce fight, he landed some crazy spinning strikes right on his opponent's chin, and he really didn't even phase him at times. So, I mean, if he was having trouble with that against a light heavyweight, I think it could be even bigger problems against a heavyweight, somebody that has taken that kind of punishment before and kept going strong, like Derek Lewis. So, I'm going to go with the side of Derek Lewis. I really think that size is going to play a big factor here, and I think he probably pulls this one out. Now, this takes us to the first Ultimate Fighter Season 19 Finals bout. This is in the middleweight division between Diego Lima, who is 9-1, taking on Eddie Gordon, who is 7-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Lima opens minus 245, the comeback on Gordon plus 175. We have seen some action come in at 5 times on this fight. Lima's all the way down to minus 165, so Gordon is getting the respect. He's down to plus 125. I gotta say, I'm a little impressed and surprised by the overall action that they're getting, because Lima has that kind of hype and buzz around him. I mean, like his brother Douglas is a Bellator welterweight champion. I mean, you can't say how good the guy has been performing. Nasty striking, jiu-jitsu game solid, hard to take down, decent wrestling. So Diego Lima is almost a carbon copy of that, but just not quite as good. But he did perform well in the Ultimate Fighter for sure. And again, has a well-rounded skill set. He's got good power on the feet. So a lot of similarity to his brother for sure, but just not quite that popular. And obviously, even at the betting window, he's not quite that popular. But I think overall, the action's kind of smart, because I'm expecting a very competitive fight here. Again, Lima does have the natural abilities here. I don't think he should be fighting at 185. I should say that up right away. I mean, this is out of his weight class. And Gordon actually has fought heavier in the past. So he's a big, strong 185 pounder. And man, the guy has, again, a ton of heart, the physical strength and power, to go along with it is going to be problems, I think, for Lima, because Lima starts off the fight well. He does tend to fade a little bit, and he almost fights to the level of his competition. So he lets sometimes the fighters push the pace against him, hold him up against the fence, and kind of dictate the pace of the fight. He's not going to be able to do that with Gordon, or he's going to lose this fight. Lima's going to have to be more technical, try to light him up a little bit on the feet, keep his distance, keep Gordon from getting the takedowns, which I think is very possible, because Lima does tend to make some mistakes once in a while, and is able to get put on his back and off his back, even though he does have some good submission skills as shown on the show, with his arm bars and triangles and that sort of thing. He still doesn't want to be in that spot with Gordon on top of him, pounding on him. So I think Gordon's sub defense, he trains with a good camp, Serra-Longo. His sub defense is going to be pretty solid. I'm not expecting Lima to actually catch him by sub. And again, Gordon's going to be in better shape. Both these guys are going to be in better shape, but I think Gordon is going to be able to control, dictate where the fight goes, and Lima's going to have to just sit there and sniper him and pick him apart a little bit. And if it does hit the ground, try to work his submission game, but I don't know if he's going to be very successful. But skill set, as far as skill set goes, you got to kind of lean with Lima overall, though. I think, again, he is the more gifted, the more talented fighter. I've been on the fence. I've been kind of going back and forth on this fight myself. I am going to slightly lean towards Lima, because I do think, again, he's got more potential, and especially if he gets this W here, he's going to probably drop down to the 170 weight class, which is a way better fit. But I do expect a very competitive decision. I think it could be possibly a controversial decision. So again, the early action that came in on Gordon, I can understand that, because I do think it's a dog or pass situation. And I do think that we will eventually see the line climb back up a little bit on Lima as well, with the hype, with the buzz surrounding him. And again, with everybody just knowing the Lima brothers are legit, that they're threats everywhere the fight goes, I think he's going to get that kind of respect. But I'm very, very slightly leaning towards Lima, because he is the better fighter, but I think Gordon's going to push the pace and make this a very tough fight.
Now, this is a situation where I really think the public's coming in on the wrong side. Eddie Gordon is a pretty talented middleweight. He trains out of a great gym alongside Chris Weidman and those guys. But man, I just really don't think that he has that UFC talent yet. He still needs a little work. Diego Lima is much more polished. Lima throws crisp combinations on the feet. He has a rock-solid ground game that's developing just like his brother. And man, he's just a much, much more complete and well-rounded mixed martial artist. Gordon, the biggest advantage that he has in this fight is the fact that he's a natural middleweight. Lima obviously is a welterweight that just is competing at middleweight on The Ultimate Fighter because he didn't have to cut weight a lot on the show. Gave him a nice advantage in speed and everything. But what this fight's going to come down to is whether or not Gordon can get his paws on Lima, drag him to the ground, maybe put him in the fence, just do whatever he can to take away Lima's weapons. I really feel like if Lima's in open space, he should be able to get the better of Gordon on the feet. And if Lima gets top position on the ground, he should be able to land some nasty, brutal ground and pound. And if Lima, finds a bit decent enough opening on the canvas, Lima should be able to pull off a submission. He had 2 solid submissions on the show to punch his ticket to the finals. And his fight to get into the house showcased his total skill set, where he was able to win a very easy decision. So he clearly can go the distance if he wants to, and I think that he definitely has much better finishing instincts and finishing ability than Gordon. Gordon, on the other hand, had some very competitive fights on the show. He had some split decisions. He had multiple fights make it to the 3rd round on the show, and I think he just doesn't quite have that ability yet. So that's really what it's going to come down to for me. I think on the feet, Lima should be able to light Gordon up. And on the ground, Lima should be the better in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and everything in submissions. So unless Gordon is able to take Lima down repeatedly and keep him there, because that is how Lima lost his last bout in MFC, I really feel like this is Lima's fight to lose. And then we can see him win, drop down to welterweight where he belongs, and have a pretty successful UFC run. So my pick is Diego Lima. Now this takes us to the co-main event of the evening, where we have the light heavyweight finals of The Ultimate Fighter Season 19, this time between Corey Anderson, who is 4-0, taking on Matt Van Buren, who is 6-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Anderson opens -140. Van Buren opens even money. Now, Van Buren on Twitter was kind of mad at us all for opening him up as the underdog, so that's not surprising. But what is surprising a little bit is that Corey Anderson is up to -190, and he was actually a little bit higher at one spot, too. So not only did I open Van Buren as the underdog, but most people out there think he's going to lose as well. Because you know what? Corey Anderson's skill set, it's pretty solid. I mean, Anderson's more of a grappling-based fighter that has some boxing to go along with it. Good fight IQ, good cardio, very solid overall. I mean, that's why he made the finals, definitely in this spot. He performed very good on the show, had some solid competition. He's young, he's well-rounded. Again, he's got that solid wrestling base. He's got good hands, good fight IQ, good clinch work, effective knees. He has nice ground and pound when he hits the fight. He does get to the floor. He can utilize some nice ground and pound, looks for submissions, but just doesn't have anything too dominant. I mean, he's just pretty solid everywhere. And again, with that fight IQ, with the cardio, he's pretty impressive, and he's going to be a tough out. But I do think people are underestimating Van Buren, even though he basically told us we didn't know what we were doing as far as odds go. I think Van Buren has a legit shot of winning this fight, because once you get him to the floor, he's kind of hard to keep down. I mean, he manages to fight his way back up to the feet. Once he's on the feet, he's a very aggressive, tall, lanky, effective striker. I mean, the guy throws punches well. He throws them with intent. He throws his kicks well, throws them with intent as well. He gets a little bit too sloppy, too aggressive sometimes. That's what leaves openings, and that's why he's been clipped and hurt before in the past as well. But I think overall, he's going to be the more effective striker. I mean, if you look at Anderson, sure, he's looked pretty impressive with his boxing on the show. You could definitely tell offensively he lands. He looks okay, but defensively, he gets tagged. And I just don't know if the fight stays upright, if he's going to be able to withstand a lot of Van Buren's attack. I mean, Van Buren does have a lot of power. Again, he mixes everything up well enough. And Anderson was getting hit quite a bit on the show. And again, Van Buren lands on him. I don't think he's going to be able to take the punishment like he did on the show against somebody like Van Buren. So I really think it all depends on Van Buren's game plan. I mean, he does train with a solid camp. He's coming out of Alliance. So I'm expecting, again, his skill set to continue to improve. He's got some motivation and something to prove, I think, because he went on that bad kind of Bellator run. I mean, it was disappointing. There was a lot of hype, with Van Buren actually in the Bellator scene. A lot of people believed that he was, had a lot of potential and was very capable of doing some good things in Bellator, and he suffered a couple upset losses. So I think that threw his career into a bad spot. Now he got kind of a second resurgence, another chance in the Ultimate Fighter, and he had that very impressive comeback win over Spohn in the semifinals, which got him to this spot here, and he kind of showcased what he's all about and how effective he can be with his striking. I'm going to actually lean towards Van Buren because, again, I think Anderson's best path to victory here is actually getting the fight to the floor and trying to ground out Van Buren, but I think along the way, Van Buren's going to manage to scramble back up, and again, he's going to go crazy a little bit at times and start unloading a barrage of attacks, some punches, some kicks, and I think he's going to start clipping Anderson. So I'm actually going to go on a little limb and pick the underdog here. I'm expecting competitive fight back and forth, but I think Van Buren can land the more damaging of shots, and I think he could be the more effective striker overall. So even though I open him as the underdog, I am going to pick Van Buren to come through here and possibly get the upset win.
It finally happened. I disagree with you on a fight. I'd really feel like the public's on the right side for this. Maybe they're going a little too heavy on Corey Anderson, but I really feel like Corey Anderson's wrestling and overall aggressive offensive attack is going to be able to neutralize what Van Buren wants to pull off. As long as Anderson is able to take Van Buren down, he should be in pretty good shape. Van Buren is long, he's lanky, he's dangerous on the feet, he absolutely is. And he is dangerous even when fending off takedowns, as he saw in his fight to get in the house. You know, he was able to land some Travis Brown elbows to get a TKO victory. So the guy definitely has finishing ability. He's one of those make it or break it, live by the sword, die by the sword type of fighters where he's aggressive and he will either try to get that finish or he will get finished. And we've seen it a couple times now. In Bellator, he got submitted and knocked out quickly in the first round. That actually was what Nick was talking about that kind of sent him into that tailspin a little bit. And I'm not quite sure that Anderson's the type of fighter that's going to be able to do that against Van Buren. So maybe that is to Van Buren's advantage. And in terms of gyms, I really think Van Buren does train out of a better gym. He's with Alliance compared to Anderson, who trains with a smaller gym. So Van Buren is getting that high-level coaching and high-level game planning, which could give him another advantage. But the problem that I have here is that really Van Buren's biggest strength is going to be his striking on the feet, his power, really what he can pull off in terms of the stand-up. And I think Anderson can hold his own there. He's not obviously a huge knockout artist on the feet. He's not a huge finisher. He really wrestled more on the show. He didn't really get a chance to showcase exactly what he was capable of on the show. He played it a little safe. And that actually could be to Anderson's advantage if he just plays it safe against Van Buren, wears him out a little bit, takes him down, grinds him out, and as long as he doesn't get stood up, he could be in pretty good shape. This fight will completely come down to whether Van Buren can keep this fight standing, whether Van Buren does not get flustered and is able to implement his game plan on the feet and land some big strikes, and whether or not Anderson is able to be aggressive on the feet, to land those strikes, and soften Van Buren's takedown defense up to set up those takedowns and keep Van Buren on his back, because that's exactly where he wants to put him. And I really think that Anderson should be able to pull it off. He is the more complete mixed martial artist, in my opinion, and he's probably going to be taking Matt Van Buren down at will. And unless Van Buren's takedown defense has gotten considerably better, I think this is Corey Anderson's fight to lose. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a featherweight contest in former lightweight champion Frankie Edgar, who is 15-4-1 overall, taking on former welterweight and lightweight champion BJ Penn, who is 16-9-2 overall. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Edgar opens minus 350, the comeback on Penn plus 250, and another line. I mean, we were just talking about on the last Oddscast of how some of those lines with Uriah Faber and Ronda Rousey moved crazy. This is another one here for the Ultimate Fighter 19 finale. BJ Penn opened as a slight dog, and now he's a huge dog. Looking over at the line of 5 dimes, Frankie Edgar's minus 750. The comeback on BJ Penn is plus 450, and there was insane movement. I mean, it was over. Frankie Edgar at one point was over 10-1 as far as the favorite goes. So again, a lot of that's heavy parlay action. A lot of it's just enormous support on Edgar, because everybody, I think, believes out there, the people that are betting, at least at this point, that BJ Penn is done, and he's just, past the point of his career that he can be a talented fighter or a champion level fighter. And it's hard to argue that. I mean, if you look at BJ Penn and his last several fights, I mean, he's been a disappointment. I mean, he looked great there in that spot early on against John Fitch, surprised a lot of people, even with his wrestling, his takedowns. He started to decline a little bit. Fitch got back into the fight, but I think that was actually a bright spot along his career. you look at his more recent fights, I mean, against Diaz, against Rory McDonald, I mean, the guy definitely faded and that cost him the fight. So beyond round one, I mean, BJ Penn, how can you really trust this guy? I know he's looked great. He's training with, Jose Aldo and the crew over there in Brazil. So I understand he's had a pretty solid training camp. And again, physically, he looks like he's making the cut at least, little by little pretty well, to 145. So that might not be a problem. And, 155, he did have a little bit of cardio, better cardio, I should say, than he did at 170, no doubt about that. So there's a lot of question marks around Penn right now. And as far as pure talent goes, I mean, there's no question BJ Penn is a talented fighter everywhere it goes. He's going to have, I was going to say he's got a height advantage, but he doesn't have a pure reach advantage. I was going to say he's got the reach advantage, but he does not. Edgar actually has a 2-inch pure reach advantage, even though Penn is about 3 inches taller. So that makes things a little bit interesting. But as far as pure boxing goes, man, I give the edge to BJ Penn really, especially in round one. I mean, I think he could be more of the, knockout type of puncher. I mean, Edgar has been tagged. He's been rocked several times actually throughout his career now. And BJ Penn does have devastating knockout power. So if it stays standing, especially early on, I actually give the edge to BJ Penn, even though Edgar is definitely a very talented, fast, little spark plug there, man. He moves in and out and uses angles pretty well. And his boxing and overall ability on the feet is tremendous as well. But I still give the edge on the feet to BJ Penn. Now, Frankie, where he's going to have the advantage is obviously he's going to probably have to weather that early storm, as I just said. And then I think he takes the fight over in round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5. I mean, the guy's got a ton of heart. He's got a ton of cardio. I mean, stamina's not ever a problem with Frankie Edgar. And he's a very smart fighter, so he knows when to mix in takedowns, when to, just mix up his striking enough or to use his angles enough and to adapt to what his opponent's doing to become more successful as the fight goes on. That's one thing. I mean, fight IQ for Frankie Edgar has always been on his side and it's always been very impressive. So I do see what most people see here. I don't have personally myself. BJ Penn has been one of my favorite fighters throughout his career because of his all-around skill set. The guy's a stud on the ground. The guy's a stud on the feet. He's just a fun fighter to watch. He's so talented, but you got to look at it for what it is. And Edgar is a more, solid fighter, as a more steady fighter, as a fighter you can depend on a little bit more so than Penn at this point. So I got to lean with Frankie Edgar as well. I do think he's going to probably get this victory here, especially if he survives and does not get clipped by Penn early on. I think it's his fight to win or lose. So if Frankie fights smart, he should get the W here. But the current price, honestly, I think it's a dog or pass situation, and BJ Penn is probably getting a little bit too much disrespect at plus 450. But then again, all the stuff I said, if BJ doesn't finish in round 1, hard to imagine he wins. So I got to go with Edgar here.
And I'm in complete agreement. As you saw, the first time they fought, Frankie Edgar walked away with a controversial close decision, and they were evenly matched then. This was at lightweight. And then they fought again, and this time Edgar absolutely crushed BJ Penn. It was one-sided. He was dominant. And BJ Penn moved on to bigger and better things in the welterweight division, and Edgar dropped down to featherweight. Now, the thing that's changed, obviously, is, BJ Penn hasn't gotten any better. In fact, he's gotten much worse. He's getting older. His conditioning is getting worse. His defense is worse. His boxing is worse, in my opinion. Everything about BJ Penn has gotten worse, and that's because he's 35 years old. You really don't see guys get better at that age when they're in the lightweight and lower. You just need to be able to move quickly. You need that explosion. You need the conditioning, and that all starts to go out the window when you start to get up there in age. Now, Penn has looked better when he was fighting in the lightweight division. He had better conditioning. He was stronger physically, or he was a little stronger in terms of punching power and everything. But I just don't see it. I don't see how he could drop down to featherweight and all of a sudden that'll fix all the problems that he's had in the last few years. I mean, granted, Frankie Edgar's not Rory McDonald, but in that fight, BJ Penn looked like a shell of himself. I mean, it was embarrassing. And he looked embarrassing in the second and third rounds against Nick Diaz as well. So I just don't see it. I don't see how BJ Penn can suddenly revive everything. All the momentum's with Frankie Edgar right now. He looked pretty sharp in both of his featherweight fights he's had so far. BJ Penn, while he was a terrific and incredible fighter, I just don't think he has it anymore. And if anything, Edgar, I can see taking him down. I can see Edgar outworking him on the feet. Edgar should have a speed advantage. Edgar's going to have a huge cardio advantage. And I think Edgar's actually going to have a striking advantage after the first round when BJ Penn slows down. So my pick is definitely Frankie Edgar, and unfortunately, I think this might be the last time we see BJ Penn inside the octagon. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you guys have already hit the themes correctly. I mean, BJ Penn is definitely at the end of his career here. And his stats are impressive when I remember that mostly he performed at either welterweight or lightweight. So here he is dropping down a weight class, and that's the key here. So this is definitely an example of a fight where you need to look at how he looks on weigh-in day. He's run the gamut. He's looked great. He's looked poor. His performance usually correlates with that. So if he comes in, makes weight easily, looks fantastic, energized, he might have a pretty aggressive, competitive early portion of the fight. But that's the key here, because we've seen Edgar he's been the underdog twice, he's run away with it twice, and he has done it because he is well-rounded, he's durable, and he just outworks people. And even when he loses early rounds, he's come back. I mean, he came back against Jose Aldo and took a round towards the end. Edgar knows how to hustle, and he stays in there. Despite having been knocked down 4 times already in his UFC career, Edgar still manages to fight through that. And that could be the only real path that I see for BJ Penn, is for an early finish. He does hit hard, his accuracy is great, and he might come in just raring to go out of the gates. And this is not a situation where, he looked terrible against Rory McDonald, or Nick Diaz. He is actually facing an opponent that is roughly the same size as he is. So this should be fairly even right out of the gates, but the opportunity is going to be fleeting. If he doesn't do it early, he's going to fade. We've seen it in every fight he's ever been in. He simply does not have the cardio to hang in there with a guy like Frankie Edgar.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for the Ultimate Fighter 19 finale. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast, featuring our premium bets, will be out sometime Saturday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there, so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.